First off, we're going to go to GitHub and set up a new repository. Set it private. We want to have a README. We're going to set this to a node project. Okay, once that's created, we're going to grab the clone URL. I'll pop open an instance of PowerShell. And we're going to use our local copy of Git and clone the repository. And that's it. Then we copy in our files.
Okay, so I'm up to version 0.1.1, and by that I mean that I've got, well, here's my backlog. Oh, so let me just say real quick. Here is the time card I keep to keep track of, how I'm spending my time. So up to this point, I've put in some basic stuff that I've stolen from other projects that I've done. I'm allowed to do that because it's my code. And so here's the phases that I mapped out. I said, okay, for this phase one, I'm going to just do basic login. I have enough code to do login sitting around. However, I did not have it all in one place, so I had to bake, borrow, and steal little pieces here and there. Base functionality of just a working app was supposed to be phase one. Took a while to get that debugged. We're up to that point right now. Phase two is going to be the release process. I'd like to do some Terraform of the infrastructure. Phase three, which I'll describe more in a future video. Phase three, list creation and management, all sort of list stuff, uploading lists, whatever you got to do. Phase four, complex version of the list stuff. Phase four would be the SMS stuff that's described in the design, and that's for outbound. And then there's phase five would be inbound SMS. Phase six, ability to accept money and talk about productizing. So I was thinking about, okay, how much am I willing to spend before I give up on this project? So I'm saying $1,000, which for an individual or a family is really a ton of money, but for a business, it's like a drop in the bucket. So I feel like it's a happy compromise, something that I may renege on that, but that's where I'm thinking right now. So I would say I'm going to pull it if it costs more than that. So I'm thinking if this does work, I figure I can charge about $5 per person per year. When I say per person, I mean per admin, someone who owns the list, not for individuals on the list. I think it's worth $5 for a family to have a nice system to manage their list, etc. I hope so. I may have to play with that a bit, but that's where I'm thinking right now. At first, I would offer that for free, and I'd like to think that maybe there could be a free level ongoing, maybe without texting, or maybe only one list per person, or we'd have to talk about what that free level would look like. But I understand how there ought to be a free level in order to get any kind of traffic on your site. If you just say $5 up front, no one's going to want it. So schedule, I want to get the phase one done by September 1st, and therefore all the other phases would be 2 weeks each. Therefore, it'll be done late November, which is really cutting it close if I want to get this out the door by Thanksgiving. Well, here we go. It's the best I can do at this point. Oh no, let's run the test. Test. Okay, starting up. The database is hooked up locally. The email is remote. 82 passing tests. Yes, that's the way to do it. So yes, I'm already up to 82 tests because, like I said, I stole it all from an existing project, even though it did take me, what did I count? 10 hours or more. Yeah. So I'll show you what it does in a minute. There's a whole startup sequence here. Okay, so we have everything started up and listening on port 4000 on the local host. So we have, it starts out by saying no AWS was requested because I intend to host this on AWS, but for now I'm bypassing that. So I'm grabbing the database password from the environment. I'm grabbing the email password from the environment. The configuration is then ready. Starting up a connection pool to the database on localhost. The JWT service is ready. The mail service is ready. And the servers then start on a 4000. So what is all of that about? Just describe this a little bit. So I do have a www, a website basically that has everything in it that I need to run the website. So I have my CSS, I have a download folder for future downloads. I have an image folder that just has one image in it. I have JavaScript files, my favicon. I have 3 HTML files so far, and I have my app, and so a Docker file too. But we'll talk a lot about that sort of stuff later. I have some tests that are built in and all working, as you saw. And I have routes. This is where all of the incoming signals get routed to, all incoming requests. And then they use these source files. When talking to the database, here are the 2 files that are, basically objects for database calls. It's not, I don't believe in an ORM, Object Relational Manager, what's that called? Model, Object Relational Model, what that stands for. I don't believe in those for these kinds of apps. No SQL belongs anyplace else but in these files. The routes don't have that. The routes will call these files, but that's it. I always have a route for the health check. We'll need that for hosting things in a container. And I use a ping in order to verify that someone is already logged in, which, maybe I'll describe at a future episode. Let's go take a look at the app file. That's what I was talking about with the overall structure of the app. I'm using New Relic for monitoring the app, and I'll show you more about that later. This is a Boolean to tell me whether or not I'm in a testing mode. We'll need that for looking at the way testing is done for API testing. Then there's, I use the events in order to signal between the modules when setting things up. So this is an Express app. You can definitely look up other things about Express online. I'm not going to get into details about that. We're using the path. We're using a Sir favicon module. We're using Morgan for logging. I made my own little HTTP codes converter, which uses, well, I could show you real quick. Here it is. It pulls in HTTP status codes module, which is something you get from npm, and I just modified it to my own needs. Okay. Oh, sorry. Back to app. So then I have an authentication module. Then I'm starting to pull in what my routes are. There's the health route, the ping route, the API user route, the API public route, and I'm pulling in the package so that I can read from it. That's a bit odd, but yeah, I can then pull up the version that I'm actually running. Okay, so this is when I talked about the startup events. This is an event emitter is for you to communicate between modules. I'll come back to that subject. Default port, if I don't get it from the environment, that's the default that we get. So the config module the config file gets the event emitter, and it gets the testing flag that I just gave there. So we'll need to have a special way to pull that in on the config file. Database also cares about these startup events, so does JWT and mail. We can't connect to the database or the JWT setup or the mail setup until we've completed our config process. I'll show you that config file in a little bit. But when the config is done, it signals to the other modules, okay, you can now start up because you have config information to start from. So then I have use. I'm using different modules in order to do various things. Here's the logger setup. I don't care if there's a not found coming through. If someone's sending a request for a file that I don't have on my website, I don't need to log that. And if someone is checking the health route, I don't need to log that either, assuming that it worked okay. If there's an error on the health, I do want to see that in my logs. So I'm saying here is that favicon, it's underneath the www folder, and anything that is coming through to www, I'm going to say is static. Just return it straight. Don't go look at anything else. Don't execute anything else in this file. Just execute this static return. Anything coming in under /health goes to the health path. Anything that comes in under your API, see, API is separate from everything else. So we got the ping, the user, anything that's public, I'm going to have as the last thing on my list. As I add more routes, I'll stick them in here between the user and the public route. Anything that comes in at the root, I'm just going to redirect back to the index file. That's just like, default. And then if everything falls through all of that, then I just say, something's missing. Can't find that file. I just literally write out an HTML file right there with a status not found. My first log, I say I'm starting this package and this version, so I have it right there at the top. I know what it is I'm running. And when I get an event coming through saying your configuration is ready, then I'm going to do the following things. I'm basically going to start listening on that port. So if you're in test mode, we're going to go through a loop. We're going to wait for, there's my wait ready function that's a promise that I'm circling around back on itself. And so I'm waiting for the server to be done. And if it is done, then I send back the config values. If it's taking too long, if it gets down to a 0 delay, then I just say, okay, this is just taking too long, abort. And then I set a timeout. This delay starts at 100 milliseconds and gets smaller by 5 milliseconds each time around the loop. So I'm not sure what that adds up to. Is that 550 milliseconds total? I'm not sure. Anyway, so it keeps going faster and faster around the loop until eventually it gets down to 0 and it says, okay, you're just taking too long to start up. So what is that startup? I mentioned before that that's being done here in the config, and then it's signaling these other items. Remember over here, these are the processes we go through before it says, okay, now you're starting on port 4000. Just take a look at that config file a little bit. There's probably some semi-secret things in here. Oh well, maybe I can gray some things out. I'm going to be using US East 2 for AWS. Here are the names of the two secrets I'm going to be grabbing. That may change, but that's how it's set right now. So I have a database section. I'm using localhost. My database is named Family Santa. I'm using a username, SVC Family Santa, and the password is already, you'll see, is passed in from the environment. Mail, I'm using mail.familysanta.com. And the user is app@familysanta.com. The password is pulled in from the environment. sending a copy of all emails to the admin at Family Santa, so I have a record of what's been sent. And the reset URL that's sent out in an email is this URL right here. This is in preparation for an SMS. This is not the right phone number. That's from another project, but I'll put in the right phone number once I have it. And then the JWT, how long is that going to last? I say 2 hours. I don't know. I can change that. That's just how it is right now. And the RSA, this is just a temporary value right now. The real value will be pulled in from the configuration. And that's the RSA would be the 2048 byte RSA key for doing the encryption of the JWT. Okay. The way this starts is down here. Where is it? Okay, I'm exporting this module right here. So I say, okay, first you got to make sure that the tier value is set. Check for no AWS. If that's true, then it's just going to grab things from the local environment. Otherwise, we're going to go out and we're going to grab a secret from AWS. If you don't know what a secret is, look that up separately. I'm not going to go into that much detail here, but I'm just going to grab those values from the AWS secret, and we're going to parse that and set the local variables, the config variables, to the things that we need to set. Two different secrets are pulled in. And then here, under the environment, I'm grabbing the database password, the host, the if it exists, the user name, and the mail password. These are pulled in from the host. If they exist, then we're setting that in this config object. So we start out with this big config object here, and we're adding on to that object as we read in the environment or read in secrets. And then we say, okay, can we start up? Do we have enough information here? Do we have at least a database password? Is that it? Yeah, that's all I'm checking for at this point. So if it's ready to start up, it says can start, then I send this, I emit from at the startup, the event emitter, I say config ready, and then it calls to those other these other setups. Hey, you can start up your setup now that the config is pulled in. So let's take a look at that one real quick. The DB, JWT, and mail. DB. So it says, okay, if there's some kind of startup object, which there is, we pass that in. On config ready, do the following things. Grab anything under the database branch of the config data and use that for starting up your connection pool, and make sure you do some looking for if other events from the database connection. You want to be able to handle those. You'll probably steal that code from me, and here's JWT. Once it gets config ready, you set up the expires in, the issuer, the audience, the private key. Why is that? Okay, so I need to have the the signature and the verify. Those are both of the things that are returned. Here's the sign process. Here's the verify process. It's built off of the JSON Web Token package. Hopefully that makes sense. And then mail is actually pretty straightforward too. It's just using the standard node mailer package. I just do a send message. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that. So once it gets signaled, hey, you've got everything you need to send things, then it set things up for mailing. Back on this. So once everything is all set up, then once the config is ready, then you're going to be setting up the port and listening for any incoming requests, and you're off to the races using the code that you just put together. And so it's pretty. So the thing that's different that wasn't intuitive is that you can't just start talking to your database because you don't know what the database password is yet, and you can't just start emailing and because you don't know the email password, and you can't set up your JWT because you don't have your RSA key yet. It's very dangerous and very bad to be keeping anything that's super secret like those three things in your code, in your code base, in any place. So you should either keep it in your environment or you should keep it in your database, assuming your database is clean. So I've done that in some projects. I'll have just a database password that is secret, and everything else that's secret is in one table in the database. There's some risk to that, but the whole point is your database should be secure to start with. Otherwise, like in this scenario, the way I have it set up here is you're going to be pulling from AWS secrets and then filling in everything and then setting everything up from there. Once you get all your config information set up, it'll cycle through and set everything else up. And you have to have a delay on that and have it waiting until you have all the secrets you need, and then it's off to the races, running and working fine. And that's the ugliness that it is on your very first page here. Yeah.